what our new center can do to connect ASU faculty with new faculty to make the most intellectually interesting and significant things happen. Before we go further, two brief announcements. One, to get on the mailing list so you know about these kinds of events in the future. All you do is send an email to CEMPH, C-E-M-P-H, Center for Evolution, Medicine, and Public Health at ASU, and that'll get you on the mailing list. It just goes to one person who will put you on the mailing list. Sudhir, I'd ask you to start because you weren't here, but that wouldn't be fair because you haven't heard everybody else talking. I just wanted to mention Sudhir since he runs already a Center for Evolutionary Medicine and really phylogenomics and bioinformatics here at the University of Michigan. Mark Flinn, in your absence, presented a... Oh, am I not at Michigan anymore? And welcome to 2013. Well, while we're at it, thank you, Sudhir. Thank you. Some things just become automatic, right? But I wanted just to emphasize, Mark showed a slide that you didn't see about Tinbergen's 4 questions and how there are these really 2 different kinds of questions in evolutionary biology. Some are about phylogeny, and some are about adaptations, natural selection, and the like. And you know, what Sudhir has done is created one of the world's best centers studying phylogeny, which is going to be a crucial resource for people coming in here to work on problems about evolution medicine, really nicely complementing work that Bill does and Andrew and Bernie, and I think it's really going to be very fun to see what we might be able to develop. So these 2 centers are very much synergistic. I can well imagine 3rd or 4th centers of other aspects coming along. However, these are the 2 main questions that evolutionists ask. What's the phylogeny and how did it get that way? What's the adaptive significance and possible function? So we really look forward to working with Sudhir about all of this. Anne, I think I'm going to call on you first, simply because Anne really exemplifies the kind of bridging person that I think is going to make everything work. An anthropologist who studies genetics of disease, and she has a really broad perspective that's relevant to the development of the center. What do you think ASU can do, Anne, to make all this happen in the best way possible? And at this point, we're quite interested in wild ideas as well as very sensible ones.
I think we're still trying to figure that out in some ways. And am I loud enough? Okay. I think this morning we discussed some of the questions about how you, in a center like this, integrate some of the biological underpinnings as well as the more broad outreach sorts of questions that are ethical and things like that, and how do you tie those together and which directions do you want to go in. And I think here at ASU there's some wonderful resources that can be linked to both in terms of SEMI and but also other people here. So I think the possibilities are very exciting. I haven't quite figured out the right direction to go, or if there is a right direction. There are probably several right directions to go.
We're trying to get so much advice from so many people.
Yeah.
Figure out exactly that answer to that question.
But you know, I think that there are, given the advances that are being made in genomics and in proteomics and transcriptomics, all the omics, as well, you know, and their links, potential links to medicine in terms of understanding these underpinnings. And these, of course, raise huge ethical questions in many ways. We talked about synthetic biology and some of the possibilities there, and also some of the scary possibilities there. So these are all possible directions, I guess.
So I'm only going to call on one other person, and then I'll let them make their own choice about how to proceed. But I'd like to ask Cynthia Stonnington, who's a practicing physician from Mayo Clinic, who does research on Alzheimer's disease and also has a background in evolutionary biology, a very rare person. There are very few physicians who are actually evolutionarily knowledgeable about all of this. And I think she may have good ideas for us about what to do.
I don't know, but what I would say is that, sort of drawing from some of the comments that had been made earlier, I think it is really important, number one, to have very good science that really legitimizes, so that you really do have to have people that are doing credible, good science. That's number one. And number two, and I think this is the harder question, how do you, if you're when you're if that science suggests strategies that would mean sort of problem solving that is very different from what we're already doing, if in terms of how we approach a problem, how we approach a disease, if it sort of shifts our way of doing things, then that's a huge problem, because people don't like to shift or change from their way that they do it. And I have a feeling that some of the science that is coming out of evolutionary medicine would be, doing just that. And so I think then, I don't know if I have the right any answers for that, other than I think, as I said earlier, starting with credible science that makes people really sort of wake up, and then maybe addressing problems that are near and dear to everybody's hearts. And so those are those very complex diseases that are very difficult to make breakthroughs in, and so then everyone's looking for areas where, okay, maybe we do need to address this in different ways. And so, so of course my area, of course, is problems with aging. The other ones that are talked about is obesity, things that are very, very important public health problems and has important diseases that maybe we do need to look at having a slightly different, way of approaching it. So I think there's but it definitely has to start with very good science, and really having some people here that can move that bar a little higher, so that we can
Okay,
all.
I'm going to ask you to pass the microphone either to the right or the left, and we'll hear from all members of the panel briefly. Then you can also be thinking about your questions that you can pose to the panel as well. Grab it, Sudhir.
Thanks, Randy. So I think that, as you mentioned, ASU has two centers with very similar name. As George and I were talking, there's a comma difference. Evolution, comma, medicine, comma, whatever. And then evolutionary medicine, a term that, Randy was involved in coining and then getting away from. Right, Randy? So I did offer him the center name, and he didn't take it. But these activities in SEMI, the Center for Evolutionary Medicine and Informatics, and in CEMF, they are complementary in the sense that in SEMI the focus is a lot on genomics. And genomics is basically what is the underpinning of disease at the genomics level. And genomes are a byproduct of, genomes are all products of evolution. Ultimately what we have today is what has been shaped over time. And often the evolutionary patterns are not been adaptive. So one big difference between the two centers is that in my center, because of genome focus, we look at a lot of positions which have not really undergone any adaptive change. They're really constrained. And when they change in a person, they cause disease. So a lot of interest that we have is on negative selection, not as much as positive selection. And so this is an ongoing debate on the relative role of negative and positive selection on disease. But for many, many diseases for which we have knowledge of genome changes that cause disease, a large number of them, overwhelming number of them, are actually negative selection events rather than positive selection. This is really how nature works. It is people with disease, with bad mutations often suffer from disease. So the interesting thing is to study this interplay. With SEMF, a lot of focus on complex diseases where the basis could be actually adaptive in many, many cases, as compared to other diseases where the basis could in fact be neutral or negative selection. So I think with the genome focus, the outreach that SEMI does is more about delivering technology inspired by evolutionary biology for use with practitioners and people. So for example, diagnosing mutations that might cause disease if one is carrying them, whether prenatally, postnatally, or later on in life. So in some sense, we have a lot of parallels. We are interested in outreach, but we do a different type of outreach altogether. I think Randy is very interested in physicians adopting a much more evolutionary mindset. In our case, we are interested in physicians using our tools and techniques when they do that. So from that perspective, I think at ASU, building an initiative or overall consortium where we really work closely with doctors, with patients in that sense, and working on major problems like metabolic diseases or complex diseases like stress or behavior and heart disease or type 2 diabetes. But looking at that from different facets, genomics and non-genomic facets, I think that's where the excitement comes. And I think a lot of really young people who are just coming out of universities, either their doctorate or postdoc, really think very differently from the way I think, or the way maybe you think. So I think the view, after making of key senior hires, the next focus we will all have to have is hiring really exceptional young people who think completely differently.
So Sudhir has just independently arrived at the same conclusion that the committee arrived at after 2 hours of discussion. Thank you.
Well, I think you all knew the answer already. But I think this is an exciting time for ASU, and then having SHESC or anthropology focus, biological focus, and genomic focus, along with the focus that I have and our center primarily has is computational focus, because it's all about big data computing now. If we cover all those facets in our recruiting and hire, I think we can build something completely new and quite multidisciplinary. So I think this is an exciting time for ASU.
And you and I are going to need time to talk about that. That'll be really fun. Let's see what Bernie has to say.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all of that. I think that perhaps, in my thinking, the bottom line is to get here a set of labs that represent exemplars that show to the world how evolutionary medicine gets done and how the evolutionary perspective enriches the science that is done. And really, we've had two outstanding examples of that in the talks today. And I think in both of them, one of the main aspects of the evolutionary approach that we saw is that it gives you a often profoundly new ways of thinking about questions, and it tells you what data to collect that you would not have thought about collecting otherwise. So there's nothing really fundamentally different about it in terms of methodologies or applications, but it gives you really a different perspective on what you should measure. And this, I think, it leads directly into exciting research programs. So it may not end up mattering so much what specific people come here. I think the main thing is that each of them can serve as a model for how evolutionary medicine gets done, and then people can look here and say, oh, look at these people, look at what they're doing, look at how they're doing it. I can do this too. I can use these conceptual tools, and then we'll start to influence the next generation of undergraduates and graduate students and MDs. So I'm taking that kind of a longer-term approach to the permeation of the field by having a concentration of the top people here.
Let's see what Andrew has to say.
I was a bit hesitant to offer advice to an institution I've only spent less than 24 hours in. I very much agree with the comments made earlier that the fundamentals here have to be in really strong, rigorous scholarship, and that's a very large chunk of that has got to be research orientated. There's a huge amount of really great scholarship and research going on here already, and one of the tricks is to make sure that the centre resources lever that expertise. It's very tempting, I think, to think for a new place, well, let's go and hire some great people, and that you should do. But it's also very important to make sure that the people who are already around doing great things, their capacity is leveraged, and their abilities to do things is leveraged by the resources and the facilities. In terms of the research, it seems to me that we could think about evolutionary medicine as being kind of like one of the fundamental sciences of medicine, like physiology or biochemistry, and treat it like that. And there might be a good argument for that. But I also feel a bit like there's what you might call translational research possibilities, which are opened up here, especially by the folk at the Mayo, who are going to be perhaps a bit more, because it's out here on the frontiers, a bit more exciting and a bit more interested in going places than might happen in a traditional, very conventional medical establishment. And so that translational research opportunities of working with the physicians and with public health people to make something happen, I think that's an opportunity that's going to have to be worked at a bit more than just becoming a basic science operation like physiology or biochemistry, but it has a huge amount of payoff. And ASU could really take the lead in that, given that there's a new medical school coming on stream. There's not reputations and egos and traditions in the same way that there are, well, speaking personally, up in the Northeast. So I think there really is opportunities here for that sort of more translational interface research, and I'd like to see within the centre an element of it dedicated to that.
You know, my take on this is just the right thing at the right time in the right place. You know, ASU is got, I guess, because of this remarkably innovative administration. You're sort of changing the university systems in some significant ways. The moves are huge, certainly in the areas that I'm familiar with. So bringing, you know, a new program here in evolutionary medicine is great. You know, the right people are here to work with, so there are going to be some great synergies. There are new things happening, as mentioned, you know, with Mayo and new medical program, lower level human biology major. Evolutionary medicine, I think, can really link some of the different groups, both within CLS and with other colleges, in some really important ways. I don't think you can, I don't think you can screw this one up. You know, there's just too many great things in place here for this to succeed.
Yeah. Opportunities and challenges, Randy. I mean, it's tough to add to what's already been said. I think the only thing I would say is that, you know, finally, evolutionary medicine has a home and a face, and I see it as an essential hub, and I think the spokes are not only going to be through synergy with groups like Sudhir, but also on the outside. And I see the center with all of the things that we've said about it in terms of the excellence in academic scholarship as a magnet, which is going to really attract people from around the world to come here and to live and breathe some of what we're doing, whether it's for 2 weeks or a month or 2 months. And that, for me, is most exciting. And finally, what I would say is that we have an opportunity to train the next generation like nobody else does around the world. And that, to me, is probably the most exciting part of this center.
So one of the things that is so exciting about that is that, you know, as was already mentioned, is that there's this medical school being developed, and the idea of being able to develop a curriculum within the medical school where we think about evolutionary medicine as in different systems of all of medicine is very exciting. The other thing that, you know, in the discussion we had yesterday with infectious disease group, the idea of having sort of a regular cross-fertilization with somebody from this center coming and doing rounds with doctors at the hospital or whatever on a regular basis to really kind of talk about these issues in real-world practical terms and get people thinking so that they can start to think about, oh, this would be a really interesting project. You know, we have all these patients, you have this expertise, and we can really start to come up with some very interesting translational research ideas. So I think it's, you know, and what was gratifying was yesterday when we had that very little meeting, just to, you know, as an introduction, where people were very open to it and very, you know, excited by the idea, and that is hopefully, you know, just an example of what will continue to happen in different groups. So I think that there are a lot of very interesting possibilities because of that link with, you know, real world issues.
I'm interested in the part of public health that's in this new center, because I was a public health nurse for 13 years, and I still keep my deep ties with public health, and that's where my research is, my practice, everything is in public health. And I understand how what's been presented so far very specifically talks about disease prevention and health protection, but I want to know how we can contribute to health promotion.
Somebody better grab the microphone.
Well, so can I just ask what you mean, what's the difference between health prevention and health promotion?
Well, when you're talking about disease prevention, you're really talking about primordial prevention, where you really want to start off with healthy organism. And then primary prevention is to provide immunizations and provide clean water. And then secondary prevention is to do screenings for disease so it's caught early. And so disease prevention, immunizations, clean water, sewage, we hope that that's accomplished. And then the next part about health protection gets a little bit more advanced, and that's when you're getting into public health policy about no smoking and wearing seat belts and things like that. And health promotion is really trying to raise the population to the next level of wellness so that there can be full level wellness, probably what Mark Flinn talked about. Do we need to look at stress as an epidemic and ways to help people handle stress, from a large perspective? But I mean, health promotion is an essential aspect of public health, and since the new center is going to be part of public health, I just want to know how we're going to do that.
Randy's the best to answer that one.
Leave it to Sudhir to put me on the spot. Actually, I'd like to tell you a brief story about these names that we talked about a moment ago. When we were talking about there's a foundation, which, by the way, has just announced an award today, the Omen Prize for the best paper in evolution, medicine, and public health of 2013, a $5,000 prize. Go to the SEMP website or check my website, and you'll see more information about that. But it was Gil Omen, a former president of AAAS, who, when we started writing an editorial for Science about why doctors need to know more evolution, he said, it's not just doctors, it's public health people. Get that straight. And he convinced me that, in fact, the impact of these ideas is likely to be even greater for public health than it is for basic medicine, because as people have emphasized, doctors that are in the trenches treating one person one at a time, trying to figure out what to do today and then get on to the next patient. Public health people already have a population perspective, they're thinking long term, and they're especially already thinking about epidemics and vaccination and things that are on a larger scale that makes them more amenable to evolutionary thinking. I don't think we've made contact yet with several people at ASU yet to be discovered who are mainly in public health. There were several of them, Keith Lindor, and a few others should have been here, but we managed to schedule this at the same time as the provost, a new provost, big reception. Sometimes if you're a newcomer, you can't help some kinds of conflicts. What someone on the panel, what would you say about the role of public health versus medicine?
Well, just to raise what I would consider the specific area of evolutionary medicine that's probably most relevant to health promotion would be mismatches between our current environments and the environments in which people evolve. So, for example, Mark was talking about the role of family structure and social support in mediating resistance to illness and resilience to stress. And one can certainly imagine public policy sorts of changes that would help to promote social support network sort of situations. And one can also imagine aspects related to people's lifestyles, so lifestyle choices and diet. And we've all heard of the Paleolithic diet, and there's certain good aspects of that, and I think there's certain misleading aspects of that. But what is the science, the evidence-based science behind that, and then how can that be used, once again, in public policy and in helping people make decisions by giving them evidence-based information about what sort of dietary choices they should make. And then there's mental health issues as well. So I think there is a broad range of quite direct applications there. They haven't come out in this group because there's there's less of a focus on that particular aspect here in current societies. But as Randy said, I think the applications in terms of health promotion and maintenance, the long-term health effects of that may be considerably bigger than various breakthroughs in treating diseases. Preventing is always better, right?
So maybe I could just add, it seems to me one of the things that the sort of framework, the conceptual framework you get out of evolutionary medicine might actually be in part aligned with defining what we mean by wellness. We have some sort of notion of a natural state of wellness, and it's not clear to me quite what that is, and I very much agree with the issue of mismatches there. So I think that's one area. The other thing I'd say on the public health side of things, and maybe that's what Randy meant about the impact, I think in terms of global health, developing world health, there's a huge amount of public health implications of this way of thinking. And then in terms of developed countries, some of the things you mentioned, particularly the vaccination, we're entering a new era of vaccines now that they aren't like the childhood vaccines that were fantastically successful. We hope the HPV vaccine doesn't do anything to the strain structure of the HPV population, which is detrimental, but it might. We don't know what it means to have vaccines where there's ongoing evolution in response to them. Pneumococcus vaccine. Pertussis is an ongoing evolutionary issue there. A lot of problems with pertussis. So I'd say that the sort of public health side of things you're talking about as being sort of past problems are actually very much of interest in this area as well.
So I'd like to ask the panel a question, and that has to do with Mark's idea that there's no way to fail. I think there's several ways, actually, and I'd like.
Come on, Randy.
and
you've got a lot of good things.
No, I don't think. I as a psychiatrist previously, I think a lot about positive thinking versus negative thinking, the advantages and disadvantages of both of them. But I think it's important to identify possible future potholes in the road. And several of you have said it's absolutely essential we have rock solid, evidence-based science for our core research operations. And then when you mentioned the paleo diet, I saw Ann's eyes rolling a bit, justifiably so, although there's also some useful stuff in that. And one reason Sudhir mentioned that I'm not using the term evolutionary medicine much anymore, I mean, yes, everybody's going to call this the evolutionary medicine centers no matter what we do. That's fine. But when I introduce myself to somebody like the head of the Wellcome or something like that, and I say, listen, you should really be investing in evolutionary medicine, the response I get is, we don't need any crystals or weird stuff or alternative anything. And I said, no, there's nothing weird or radical about this. This is just a basic science that hasn't been applied. But they already have the idea somehow that evolutionary medicine is a special kind of medicine, and that takes us slightly off track. So the statement I'd like to make is there's a lot of people out there saying they're doing evolutionary medicine and saying very silly things that are hokey, also things that spread widely because they're good memes. And they go viral, and the New York Times picks them up even, and they don't know how to distinguish the good stuff from the bad stuff. So one thing that we have to have a challenge here is to make sure that people recognize what we're doing is, as everybody said, really solid science. Here's the question. Do we take a critical stance and take a howitzer to some bad science and say this is why it's wrong, or do we just ignore it and let it go its own way and hope that people don't confuse that science with ours too much? Who's first?
My tendency is to ignore it. I think it draws attention if we discuss it or if we shine light on it.
So I think, Randy, you went through the trenches, in the last 20 years dealing with people like that. I didn't have to, so I feel it's a great term. So we should just go and fight with it. And I think since still the word evolution itself is under tremendous contest. So the fact that you are under contest for evolutionary medicine is just natural. And so I say, in a sense, evolutionary medicine lends more credibility to evolution because it explains a lot of things and it makes others feel, oh, okay, really, evolution happens. And I've seen many instances where just a simple example to a layperson, I mean, lay in the sense that they haven't studied evolution before, and if once they get the idea, oh, this makes sense, they are forever changed. And so what we hope is we change more people over time. And so therefore, I stuck with the evolutionary medicine as a name, and I think let's see how it goes.
Yeah, if I see some application of so-called evolutionary biology in medicine that I think is incorrect, I would want to attack it, but not with a howitzer, more with kind of the relatively constructive criticism and instruction about what I think would be the way to do it. I think the improper application of evolutionary principles can be very problematic, and it is an issue in some fields. And given that the mandate of the field is ultimately to teach people how to think in terms of natural selection and other evolutionary processes with regard to medical issues, it does become critically important to make sure that people are thinking along the correct, rigorous sorts of lines, a la George Williams and so on.
I would say one way, because some of these ideas like the paleo diet gain traction with the public and become very popular ideas out there, they are good ways to take those and then use them to educate through science cafes and talks like that target the public and people who are interested in that and really introduce them into, or bring to bear the evolutionary evidence and have them start to think critically. And one way to do that might be for the center once or twice a year to, in collaboration with the Science Museum downtown, participate in one of the science cafes, which they have monthly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm outside of the research medicine box, so just bear with my naive comments here. But actually, to your point and to some of the points that were being made, when it comes to public policy, I think it's important that we appreciate that public policy is also evolutionary, if not in a Darwinian sense, in some other ways. Although sometimes expedience comes before wisdom in the promulgation of public policy. But it is important to balance the research-oriented work that's being done with outreach on a regular basis so that we can help inform the policy-making process, at least within our respective communities. And then the other thing related to that, I suppose, is if we're talking about public policy, is there may be opportunities for this program and Sudhir's program to engage resources like the Carey School of Business and perhaps others to talk about the economics and the business implications, particularly economics, which drives policy and if not policy, what trickles down to the consumers through insurance companies and other kinds of programs. It's just important to get that more holistic kind of view as you move your programs forward. That's just my view. Thank you.
Comments from the panel?
Yeah, I very much agree on the economics issue. In particular, a lot of the motivators that determine what's happening in terms of basic patient treatment, that's economics, but also in terms of the public health aspects of things, the economics of that really matter. And the sort of things that I think about a lot are the adaptive evolution of things that harm us. So that's, broadly speaking, cancers, infectious diseases, and insects that transmit the infectious diseases. And it's an interesting question, under what circumstances is the evolution of those things economically irrelevant? It takes sufficient amount of time for your drug or your vaccine to fail, who cares? Cancer's a really nice one because it really matters. But I think what sort of time horizon are we talking about? This is a very interesting question from the economic point of view. I think there's a tendency for us all to be a bit naive on that side of things, so I very much take the point on that.
No, so I was just going to tail off the past two sort of questions there and ask also about potential responses you might have for certain issues that have come up recently. We mentioned briefly the paleo diet, which we can kind of roll our eyes at, but also there's larger issues right now with movements towards not vaccinating your children, those sorts of things, and how the center might need to respond to that.
I feel like I'm talking a bit much here, so I'll try to be extremely brief. I mean, on that particular case, the vaccine uptake thing, that seems to me to be something that is, it's not an evolutionary issue, it's just a straightforward public health issue. And to the extent that the centre can help address issues of anti-science and anti-rational thinking, that's some, but going back to Randy's point earlier about bad science in this area, which can mislead the public, I do think there are some horror stories here, and one of them really worried me. Paul Ewald, who is in many ways a key player and the founder of this field, said we didn't need to worry about flu outbreaks because even if they were super nasty like the Spanish flu, they'd quickly evolve to be nice. I mean, it just seemed to me totally irresponsible, beyond belief irresponsible to make a case like that. I don't think any of us are in a position to predict what direction virulence of a disease would go in. I don't think the science is strong enough. And in that case, I think it behoves the centre to get in there, or people involved, get in there and argue back. And in fact, Mark Lipsitch at Harvard did a fantastic job of stamping all over that one in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Those are the situations where I think probably more than vaccine uptake.
I want to move to nuts and bolts a little bit, I think, and come back to Mark's comment that there's no way to fail. One can think about a center as a collection of a bunch of really smart people doing their own work in silos. But I think for a center really to work, you want to create the synergies. And I think in order to do that, there's a lot of nuts and bolts work that needs to get done. Connections to existing people and opportunities. And the fact that ASU has a lot of that here is great. But the relationships need to be made. I've been part of 2 centers since I've been here, one of which I think didn't meet its potential, and one of which I think exceeded anyone's wildest expectations. I won't name them. But I can tell you that for one of them, the reason why it didn't reach its potential is that the co-directors didn't connect individuals who are relevant, who were on campus, who could know each other, could work together. Didn't grab them, bring them down to Starbucks, said, hey, I want you guys to meet each other, chat, disappear, and then create those kind of connections. The other one did a very nice job of doing that. The second thing that the second one did was that after making the connections and getting people to start think, they actually created the resources for folks to make the space to actually work together. So in my example, they bought me out of teaching for a semester so I could work on an interdisciplinary grant proposal, to NSF. That now enabled folks from 7 or 8 different departments on campus, highly to work together, right? And so, because we're all busy, and the people you want to work with are really good. And because they're really good, they're really busy. And so I think that's something that if you want to, centers are about synergy if they're good, and synergies need both the connections, making sure you've got all the right nodes in a network, and then creating the resources, the time, and maybe some financial resources to actually make stuff happen.
So when I took the job, Rob Page said, do you want to start in January or do you want to start in September? And I said, I'd like to start in January, and not just because it's kind of cold back where I come from, but also because I think it would be good for me to have a chance to meet as many people at ASU and Mayo as possible ahead of time before more members of the center get going and before our official start date really begins. So if any of you would like to connect with the center, send me an email, please, and let's see how many connections we can make.
My question kind of follows on from Steve's a little bit, which is, in your opinion, what are the most important aspects of infrastructure here to make a center like this a success? So broadly speaking, physical, social, informational, et cetera.
I'd say there are a couple really great things that ASU has got going for it, part of which is an administration that's not like any I have seen in terms of its support for innovative stuff. I'll do a little mind experiment here. My crystal ball 5 years from now, looking at ASU from the lofty distance of the Midwestern university that I'm from, what do I expect to see? You know, as I see it, you're going to have Souls and Shesk interacting in ways that they haven't, that evolutionary medicine is going to facilitate. Biodesign is going to be pulled in some new ways. Some of the other colleges, health innovations, are getting engaged. As the medical school and interactions with Mayo get started, there are going to be some cool new things. You're going to be hiring some of the cutting edge researchers. We're going to see some phenomenal new papers in evolutionary cancer biology, infectious diseases, perhaps mental illnesses. It's going to be hopping. This is going to work. It surely can fail, but if ever there were, you know, a good situation for this to work, well, you know, yeah.
So what I was asking him to be specific to answer your question was, is he saying that the infrastructure is already there, or do we need to create new infrastructure?
So actually this morning we looked at existing space which has been committed to the center, and it's about 4,000 square feet of, so it's about 4,000 square feet of contiguous space that we looked at this morning. I think that that's not going to be enough for 8 investigators, particularly those that are doing wet bench experimentation and may find their labs elsewhere, but we talked at great length this morning about the importance of arranging that space that encourages social interactions and making it a hub of the center itself, and an inviting hub. In fact, I was recommending to Randy that we have, you know, get off the elevator and you've got a reception area, and he said that you had sort of commented on a similar kind of style where you feel welcome and that there's a sense of community and family. So that there's that infrastructure, and I think that for those who are coming and starting wet bench experimentation, they're going to have to negotiate their own space elsewhere, but I would certainly advise that they have their offices in the main contiguous space so that we're all together and have maximum opportunity for interactions.
Yeah, I was just curious in terms of medical education, what, in surveying the medical schools across the country, what sort of represents the current exposure to evolutionary medicine in the curriculum, and you know, what opportunities are there to you know, one expose, you know, is it beyond a 2-week introduction, that type of thing, with the medical school curriculum that's so jam-packed with material in the first place, and how do you make that relevant to where it's going to impact patient care?
So I'll tackle that one very briefly, and this is a down moment, actually, because a group of us at the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center have worked together on this for the last 2 years under the leadership of Peter Ellison from Harvard and Mark Schwartz from NYU. And Athena and I and Bill are on that committee. Others have contributed to that effort. And the answer is that no medical school does much of anything to actually teach evolution. They say they're too busy. But the real issue is that they don't know anything about it. There are no evolutionary biologists on the faculty. However, they are interested, and as more and more people come up who have gotten undergraduate courses, and they're becoming assistant deans now, it's getting in there, and I think people in medical schools are recognizing that there's nothing radical about this, and it is a missing basic science. But we need someplace like Mayo or other leading medical schools to incorporate it into their curricula. Yale and Harvard are trying, UCLA is trying, but the opportunity to contribute to a new curriculum, I think, is unprecedented and a great opportunity, and so much work. It's not a job for 1 or 3 persons. It's very large. I'd like to change the subject just a little bit, away from these practical kind of matters to a more large-scale intellectual one. We've all been talking about this as a one-way street, where, you know, evolutionary biologists bring their knowledge to medicine. But I think it can go the other way as well, that medicine offers challenges to evolutionary biologists that can lead to fundamental advances. in evolutionary puzzles, or creating puzzles that lead to new advances. Anyone want to address, I mean, your work, Anne, I think may well illustrate that. Anyone want to speak about, or to put it this way, if evolutionary biologists started addressing medical problems, their funding could double in a few years.
So I'll just comment on that a little bit. So all the evolutionary biologists who get funding from NIH always write that they're going to solve some big problem, because ultimately NIH requires a health relevant paragraph or two. And I think that's how a lot of evolutionary biology in the area of molecular biology and genomics has been funded primarily from NIH. And whether it is infectious diseases, whether it is phylogenies, whether it is cancer, a lot of this work has been published, has been funded by NIH. So from my perspective, humans are a tremendous model organisms to study evolution, because we can actually go to a doctor and say we are in discomfort, or we can measure our physiological parameters, and we can detect very mild forms of phenotypes. So understanding phenotype and genotype connection and how that evolves over time is what leads to speciation and many other factors. So essentially, over time, I'm seeing humans becoming a primary model system to study evolutionary processes, population processes, the positive selection, negative selection. So in some sense, disease and medicine is going to revolutionize understanding of evolutionary biology itself. So that's how sort of I think about it, because a mouse or a cat or a cow doesn't want to go up to someone and say, today I'm not good, So this is one of those things humans report, and we are generating tremendous amount of genotype, phenotype data. So to me, this is really an exciting time for evolutionary biologists themselves to look at medical phenotypes as phenotypes of people. There's nothing medical about them except their discomfort, but they are really important phenotypes, and many are not discomfort. They are about endurance, athletics, and lots of other such positive attributes. So this is what I look forward to in the very near future. Lots of cool things coming out of evolution and medicine at that interface.
Maybe we should actually get doctors together to sit on their panel, and we as evolutionary biologists listen to them. And there are things like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. You start with a disease and then you end up studying protein folding. You start with chronic infections on catheters. Before you know it, you're studying the social environment of biofilms and the fundamental theories that are behind that. You start with schizophrenia, and before you know it, you're trying to see if, in fact, there might be competition between maternal and paternal genomes that's responsible for maintaining the frequency of some of those genes. And I bet there are dozens of other examples we just haven't thought of where we could start with a disease process and move towards really fundamental evolutionary questions. Anybody want to nominate anywhere now?
ADHD, I was just thinking.
ADHD is a good one, yeah. I'd like to wrap up in just a minute so we can go next door and talk a bit more informally and then get off to dinner. Could I ask if there are any last comments or wrap up things or provocative comments anybody wants to make? Oh, Roy? Provocative, Roy. Yeah, I'm going to be. We know that. I don't know you well, but I know that.
Yeah, and in there I want to have an argument or a discussion with Sudhir about genomics, and that that's only half the story. Adaptation is, half the story. That's half good. No, but there's something that's, and I'm fantastically excited about this institution. And I came here because of the very reasons that you espoused in your generous comments of our Michael Crow and his endeavors at this place. Really neat. On the other hand, I've been frustrated ever since I've been here by the absence of a medical school. And I realized that they've tried an experiment that didn't work, or it didn't work very well. We're about to embark on a new one with Mayo, and I'm hopeful that will work out. But in reality, I need practicing medical researchers next door, across the street, and they're not here. And so I do all my medical research not here in Arizona. I do it in Boston, in New York, in Washington, in Maryland, in St. Louis, and in Birmingham, Alabama, because that's where I've got the people in academic genetics and academic immunology and academic medical infectious disease. And so, you know, it's going to take time to evolve the sort of a structure and a network here with appropriate.
Creating the new medical school faster, are there other ways that we can ensure tight connections with medical centers for our center?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we could put in a speed rail between here and the Mayo up there or something, you know? Something that would allow for very rapid movement of people and allow them to do something on their iPad or whatever as they go, instead of having to drive for half an hour.
Okay, comments from the panel about this?
A real quick comment. I mean, there are two ways to look at that. One of which is you don't have an entrenched medical school that says, get evolution out of here. So, you know, building something up from the ground floor that can incorporate evolutionary biology is a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, the other way to go about that would be to set up some sort of fellowship program to bring doctors here for some period of time. Something that could be applied for, where you would plant the seeds for collaborations between ASU and places with more medical infrastructure.
So the medical model for the Mayo School will be to make it possible for people to get a master's degree in conjunction with their degree. And although it won't be a focus, I think some of them might choose to get a master's degree in evolutionary biology, and some of those might choose to come to ASU and go all the way and get a PhD, all the while pursuing connections between evolutionary biology and medicine. But that's not for a couple of years yet. Last comments from the panel before we wrap up.
Can I just add to that issue? I think that the other thing that the centre could consider doing is embedding evolutionary biologists, faculty, but also trainees, postdocs, and graduate students into the hospital setting. So it might be a worthwhile use of some of the centre resources to put people into those places.
These are a whole bunch of good ideas people have come up with. I appreciate them, and I'm glad you all were here with us today. Please send me emails so we stay in touch, and please join us next door for further conversation. Thanks very much.